Jack the Ripper. We call him Jack the Ripper, but we don't really know who the person behind one of the older and most notorious murder sprees was. The killer appeared in London's Whitechapel district in 1888 and murdered 5 women and all are prostitutes, and he didn't just snuff out life with a knife. He mutilated and disemboweled women, removing organs such as kidneys and uteruses, and his crimes seemed to portray an abhorrence for the entire female gender. Police surmised the killer was a surgeon, butcher, or someone skilled with a scalpel. The killer mocked the community and the police by sending letters outlining the acts. Although many suspects have been named over the years, the killer has never been identified. Pedro Lopez, one of the world's most prolific serial killers, might still be out there. Pedro Lopez is linked to more than 300 murders in his native Colombia and in Ecuador and Peru. At least 1/3 of those murders were tribal women. He described his modus operandi as first luring the victim away from public spaces with a trinket, before raping and strangling them with his bare hands. After Lopez's arrest in 1980, police found the graves of more than 50 of his preteen victims. He was later convicted of murdering 110 girls in Ecuador and confessed to 240 more murders in Colombia and Peru. The monster of the Andes didn't even spend 20 years in prison, as he was released in 1998 for good behavior. More than 20 years since, his whereabouts remain unknown. Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, is believed to have killed at least 218 patients. He wasn't caught until a red flag was raised by several people, including an undertaker who was surprised by the sheer number of cremation certificates Shipman was a part of, along with the fact that most of the cases were elderly women found to have died in bed not at night, but rather during the day. He used massive doses of diamorphine to kill his victims. Why did he kill? There isn't just one reason. One could easily say that Shipman's experiments had gone awry, and in trying to relieve his victims' pain he sent them over the edge. Others might simply claim that he was a madman. Shipman's crimes were finally uncovered after he forged the will of one of his victims. He was finally convicted in 2000 and committed suicide while in prison in 2004. John Wayne Gacy, a construction worker known by his suburban neighbors as outgoing. John Wayne Gacy was involved in politics and even acted as a clown for birthday parties. Typically, he would lure a victim to his home and dupe them into donning handcuffs on the pretext of demonstrating a magic trick. He would then rape and torture his captive before killing them by either asphyxiation or strangulation with a garrote. Gacy came under suspicion in 1978 when a 15-year-old boy, last seen with him, went missing. That wasn't the only time families of missing boys had pointed fingers at Gacy, but it was the first time authorities took them seriously. Soon after, a search warrant granted police access to the Gacy home, with the smell of nearly 30 bodies buried in a 4-foot crawl space under his home. He was executed by lethal injection in 1994. H Holmes, ahead of the 1893 World's Fair, Holmes moved to Chicago and started outfitting a 3-story hotel with all manner of nefarious contraptions, including gas lines, secret passages and trapdoors, hallways to dead ends, chutes to the basement, soundproof padding, and torture devices strewn throughout a maze. The gas allowed Holmes to knock out his guests before the worst of what was to happen came next, often on his surgical tables. He then burned the bodies in the building's furnace, selling skeletons to medical schools and running life insurance scams. His victims were usually employees, lovers, and hotel guests. Some were asphyxiated in soundproof rooms with gas lines, some were hanged in the secret hanging chamber, and others were locked in a soundproof bank vault and left to suffocate. Holmes was finally caught after attempting to use another corpse in an insurance scam and hanged in 1896. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was described as a charming, articulate, and intelligent man. The Western U.S. was his hunting ground, with an unknown number of murders piling up, mostly college-age women from Washington and Oregon all the way to Utah and Colorado. Most often, Bundy killed his victims with a crowbar, bludgeoned them with other items, or strangled them to death. He purportedly avoided guns, as they always left evidence in the form of powder. We are talking about a guy who had an IQ above 130 and had attended 2 or 3 universities. He had even studied psychology. He was also repeatedly raping his victims, in between strangling them half dead and then making them come to life. He also slept with the dead bodies of his victims and kept their severed heads in his apartment. He was eventually executed in an electric chair in 1989. Subscribe our YouTube channel for more interesting facts.